I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after Liam and I ended things. The breakup had been bitter, the silence afterward worse. When the test turned positive, my first instinct was to call him, but my pride stopped me. In the middle of my uncertainty, Daniel appeared, a colleague who had always been kind, offering quiet gestures that seemed harmless at first. When I told him about the baby, he didn't flinch. He proposed, said he would raise the child as his own. I wanted stability more than romance, so I said yes. At first, I convinced myself that this could work. We married in a small civil ceremony. But Daniel's warmth quickly cooled. He criticized small mistakes, calling me careless. Over time, his words became sharper. I learned to avoid confrontation, to shrink into corners. He never hit me, but his contempt was like a constant draft in a cold room. 3 months into the marriage, Liam's death hit me like a blow. A mutual friend told me after the funeral that Liam had left me something in his will, a house in his hometown, but with one condition: I had to live there for 1 month before deciding what to do with it. Daniel, always calculating, saw it as a chance to pay off his debts. "It's only a month," he said. "Then we sell it." I traveled alone to the village. The house was old but solid, the kind of place that carried its history in every creak of the floorboards. I unlocked the door and found someone already inside, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She introduced herself as Ruth, Liam's mother. She said Liam had known about the baby and had left the house so I would come here, so she could meet her grandson. She admitted she was unwell and wanted this time with me. I agreed to stay, not just because of the will, but because something inside me told me this was where I needed to be. Daniel's interest in my life at the village was transactional from the start. Every call began with questions about the house, square footage, wiring, roof condition, followed by reminders of how much his credit cards were costing us. The only time he asked about me or the pregnancy was in passing, as if checking off an item from a list. I settled into the creaking rhythms of the old place. Ruth moved quietly in the mornings, making tea, slicing bread, and humming in a voice that sometimes broke mid-note. She didn't pry into my marriage, but her eyes lingered on my face like she could read the weight there. When she finally spoke of Liam, it was with a tenderness that made my throat tighten. "He was proud of you," she said. Even when he didn't say it. He was saving up to build a home. I think he hoped you'd fill it with laughter. The days were slow, the air sharp with the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. I walked through rooms that felt both mine and not mine, running my fingers over peeling paint, noting the draft by the kitchen window. At night, I lay awake, listening to the house groan as if it were alive. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in the hallway closet, I found a stack of letters and a faded photograph of Liam standing by the porch steps, hair ruffled by the wind, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. I traced the edges of the photo with my thumb and wondered how different everything might have been if we'd just spoken one more time before it all fell apart. The village was quiet, but sometimes I noticed unfamiliar cars parked too long at the end of the road. Ruth seemed to notice too, glancing out the window with a stillness that wasn't fear, but preparation. When I asked, she simply said, "Some people never stop looking for trouble." I called Daniel that night, telling him about Ruth's health and my plan to fix some small things around the house while I was here. He cut me off to remind me not to spend money unnecessarily. "We're not staying there," he said. "Remember that." His voice carried that clipped edge I'd learned meant the conversation was over. I set the phone down and looked around at the chipped walls and worn banister, feeling an unexpected tug of loyalty toward a place I was supposed to leave behind. The lawyer's office still smelled faintly of dust and old paper when I returned to finalize the will's conditions. Liam's handwriting stared back at me from the page, precise, deliberate, stating that I was to live in the house for 1 full month before deciding its fate. There was no mention of Ruth, and yet she was here, as much a part of the place as its weathered clapboard siding. That evening, Ruth invited me into the kitchen for tea. The steam curled between us as she explained, without prompting, that Liam had known about the baby. "He came home one weekend," she said. "Didn't tell me where he'd been before that. But he talked about cribs like they were spaceships, and how he didn't want you to feel alone." Her voice wavered, but she kept her gaze steady on mine. He made that condition so I'd have time with you, and with him. She rested a hand lightly on my belly. I'm not well. This may be my only chance. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars spread wide and bright. I called Daniel from the back porch. His tone was brisk. So she's living there too? Fine. As long as she pays some utilities. Just make sure you're not wasting time. We need to think resale. It was as if every word he spoke was measured in cost per syllable. Over the next week, I learned the house's quirks. The hallway tilted slightly to one side, the stairs complained with every step, and the bathroom window stuck halfway open no matter how much you coaxed it. Ruth showed me photo albums filled with Liam's life, gangly childhood years, awkward teenage smiles, and the young man I knew, fixing fences and laughing at some unseen joke. But there were gaps too, blank spaces where certain years should have been. Once, while we were shelling peas at the kitchen table, a truck idled at the end of the lane longer than it needed to. Ruth didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. The engine eventually faded into the distance, but a shadow of unease lingered. I spent my evenings repairing small things. A loose cabinet door. A torn screen on the porch. They were quiet tasks, but they made the house feel more mine. At night, when the floorboards shifted like an old friend settling in, I realized I was already dreading the moment I'd have to leave. Ruth's presence in the house became part of my routine. Mornings began with the sound of the kettle whistling, her soft cough echoing from the kitchen. She moved slowly, often pausing to lean on the counter, but she insisted on preparing breakfast herself. I learned she had lived in this house since before Liam was born, watching the seasons change from the same porch swing that now swayed in the wind. One afternoon, she led me to the attic, where the light was thin and dusty. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, labeled in Liam's handwriting. Inside, I found small fragments of his life, a school report card with a teacher's note praising his curiosity, a faded concert ticket, an old leather wallet still holding a single photograph of him and me at a summer fair. My fingers lingered on the photo, tracing the curve of his smile. Ruth watched me quietly before saying, "He never stopped caring. Even after you two parted ways." She coughed again, the sound deeper now, and I noticed how her hands trembled when she set down the box. It made me wonder just how unwell she really was. That evening, I called Daniel to update him on the house repairs. I told him I'd fixed the screen door and tightened the banister. His response was curt, "Don't waste energy on cosmetic fixes. We're not staying there. Every hour you spend on that place is money lost." His voice carried the same dismissive weight it always did, and I found myself holding the phone farther from my ear. In the days that followed, Ruth and I fell into an unspoken companionship. We prepared simple meals together and spent afternoons on the porch, her knitting in her lap while I read through Liam's old notebooks. Many pages were filled with maps, names, and cryptic notes that felt out of place in the life I thought I knew. When I asked her about them, she only said, Liam had his reasons for keeping things to himself. One night, as we sat in the dim living room with the lamps casting small pools of light, I noticed headlights pause at the end of the lane again. The car idled for a moment before driving away. Ruth didn't say anything, but I saw her lips tighten. The silence between us held more weight than any explanation could. By the end of the week, I began to sense that the house was more than an inheritance. It was a tether, to Liam, to Ruth, and to a truth I had yet to fully uncover. The days in the village had a rhythm that was unlike any life I'd known. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table as Ruth moved through her small chores with a steadiness that masked her fragility. I took on repairs where I could, patching the sagging cabinet in the pantry, tightening the loose hinges on the back door, sewing a tear in the porch screen. It felt strange, investing time in a house I was expected to leave. One afternoon, while sorting through the hallway closet, I found a shoebox wedged behind old winter coats. Inside were folded scraps of paper, receipts with strange circles drawn around certain dates, hand-drawn maps marked with symbols I didn't understand. There were no explanations, just Liam's tight, hurried handwriting. I sat on the floor with the box in my lap, the air thick with questions I didn't yet know how to ask. Ruth found me there. She lowered herself to the floor with effort and took the top map from my hands. "He was in something," she said quietly. "Not something good. He told me to stay put, to keep the house safe. And he told me that if you ever came here, it would mean he still cared. That's all I can tell you." Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the shadows of late afternoon stretched long across the yard. That evening, just as the sun was dipping below the trees, a knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find a man with a jaw like a block of granite. He asked for Liam but used a name I didn't recognize. His smile was sharp and without warmth. "People aren't gone until I see them gone," he said before walking back to his truck. The sound of the engine lingered long after he drove away. Ruth locked the door and slid the deadbolt into place. "Bad people," she murmured. "Your boy's father crossed them once." It was the first time she'd acknowledged the danger directly, and it sent a chill through me that the warm kitchen light couldn't erase. That night, I dreamt the house grew legs and carried us deep into the woods, away from prying eyes. When I woke, the baby was kicking hard against my ribs, as if echoing the urgency in my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever story had begun with Liam was far from over. Ruth's cough had deepened over the past week, a dry, rasping sound that made me wince every time it caught in her chest. I offered to take her to the clinic in the next town, and though she tried to wave me off at first, she eventually agreed. The drive was long and quiet, the winter trees stripped bare, their branches clawing at the pale sky. The nurse greeted Ruth like an old friend, her voice tinged with worry. They spoke in hushed tones behind a curtain, and when she came out, Ruth looked tired but relieved to be heading home. On the way back, we stopped by the river at her request. The dock stretched out over still water that mirrored the clouds. "He built that with his hands," she said softly. "Didn't have the right tools, but somehow it stood. Still stands." She stared at it for a long moment before turning back to the car. That evening, I found something unusual. Tucked under the front doormat was a torn strip of brown paper, the edges ragged. Written in hurried block letters were the words, "Wednesday. Barn. After dusk. L." I stared at it, my pulse racing. The L could have been anyone, but something deep in my bones recognized the sharp impatience of his handwriting. I brought the note to Ruth, my fingers trembling. She took it, read it once, and then folded it with care. "If it's him," she said, her voice thin with hope, "bring him home. I want to see my boy's face before I forget what it looks like." All night, I thought about the barn. About whether this was a trap or a lifeline. I decided I couldn't tell Daniel, not yet. He would want to control it, to twist it into something useful for him. Instead, I called him with a practiced calm and told him I needed to drive back to the city to gather some baby clothes and paperwork. He responded with a distracted, "Fine," and then launched into a reminder about property tax deadlines. His voice sounded far away, like he was already somewhere else. As I hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the note in my pocket, the house silent around me. The air felt charged, heavy with the sense that something was about to change. I left for the city the next morning, telling Ruth I'd be back before the weekend. The drive was long, the familiar streets of home feeling strange after the quiet rhythm of the village. When I reached the apartment, the air was thick with the scent of cologne I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. The nursery door, the room Daniel insisted on calling his office, was ajar. I pushed it open and saw Daniel standing close to a woman I'd never met. She was perched on the dresser, her heels dangling above the floor. Their startled expressions told me more than any explanation ever could. Daniel stepped forward, his face shifting from guilt to irritation in seconds. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. The woman slid off the dresser, gathering her clothes without meeting my eyes. Daniel muttered something about me being dramatic, but I wasn't listening. My attention had narrowed to the few things I knew I needed. I took the diaper bag from the closet, my folder of medical records, the small envelope of cash I'd hidden inside a cereal box, and my passport from the drawer. I removed my wedding ring, placing it on the dresser beside where the woman's hand had rested moments before. "You'll be fine," I told him, my voice steady. "You've got your spreadsheets." He didn't respond, just stared as I walked out. The drive back to the village felt like shedding a skin. With every mile, the tension in my shoulders eased. The baby shifted inside me, his small movements grounding me in the moment. By the time I pulled into the driveway of the house, the air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke, and the sight of its weathered siding felt like safety. Ruth was in the kitchen when I came in. I didn't tell her the details, just that I was staying for now. She didn't ask for more. We had both learned to recognize the weight of unspoken truths. That night, I sat on the porch with the note in my hand, the cool air brushing my face. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Tomorrow, I would go to the barn. Wednesday arrived with a cold, thin mist clinging to the village. I spent the day in quiet anticipation, my mind circling the note over and over. As dusk settled, I slipped on my coat, tucking a small flashlight and pepper spray into my pocket. Ruth didn't ask where I was going, but her eyes followed me to the door. "Be careful," she said, her voice low but firm. The walk to the barn was silent except for the crunch of gravel under my boots. The structure loomed in the fading light, its weathered boards silvered by years of rain and sun. I hesitated at the door, the air inside carrying the smell of old hay and damp earth. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. "Liam?" I called softly. A figure stepped from the shadows. Thin, bearded, older than I remembered, but unmistakably him. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the sound of my heartbeat. He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was real. "You came," he said, his voice rough with disbelief. I crossed the distance between us before I could think. His arms wrapped around me, strong despite the hollowness in his frame. We stood there, holding on like we could anchor each other against everything that had happened. When he finally pulled back, I saw the scars along his jaw and cheek. He told me about the months in hiding, the people he'd gotten tangled with, the staged fight that convinced everyone, including me, that he was gone. "I couldn't risk them finding you," he said. "Or the baby." His voice broke on the last word, and I realized he had known all along. We sat on an overturned crate, piecing together the missing months. He explained how he'd arranged the will and the house's condition to pull me here, so his mother could meet her grandchild. "I'm sorry for all of it," he said. "More than I can explain." The barn seemed to hold its breath around us. When we finally rose, the sky outside was ink dark, scattered with stars. "Tomorrow," Liam said. "Let's go home. I need to see Mom." We walked back together, careful, quiet, the cold air stinging my cheeks. For the first time in months, I felt the shape of hope return. The next morning, the air was crisp and the light pale when we reached the house. Ruth was sitting in her usual chair by the kitchen window, knitting slowly. At the sound of the door, she looked up, her eyes narrowing as if she didn't dare believe what she was seeing. When Liam stepped into the light, she gasped, both hands flying to her mouth. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then she rose and crossed the room in small, quick steps, pressing her hands to his face like she was making sure he was solid. "You stubborn boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. She pulled him into her arms, holding him like she might never let go. I saw her shoulders tremble and felt my own eyes sting. We didn't have long to savor the moment. That same truck I'd noticed before appeared at the end of the drive, engine idling. Liam's body tensed. Without hesitation, he took out his phone and made a call, speaking in a low, clipped tone. Less than 20 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled up, their tires crunching on the gravel. The man with the hard jaw climbed out of the truck, his expression casual but his eyes sharp. The officers approached him with calm precision. Questions were asked, and though the exchange was short, I saw the man's confidence falter. One officer took a small USB drive from Liam, something he'd pulled from the shoebox in the closet. It disappeared into an evidence bag, the tension in the air easing slightly as the truck finally pulled away. Inside, We sat around the kitchen table, the three of us drinking tea that had long gone lukewarm. Liam explained that the drive held enough proof to end the trouble for good. It wouldn't erase the danger overnight, but it would give us breathing room. That afternoon, I called my lawyer from the small upstairs bedroom and began the process of filing for legal separation from Daniel. I listed every detail: his cruelty, the financial manipulation, the affair. My lawyer listened without judgment, only asking questions to make sure nothing was missed. Later, Liam came with me to my next ultrasound appointment. When the technician turned the screen toward us, our son appeared in a grainy blur, refusing to hold still long enough for a perfect image. Liam's hands shook as he reached for mine. "Am I allowed to cry?" he asked quietly. "Of course," the technician said. And he did. The final days of the month came quietly, the village steeped in the gentle hush of early spring. The air softened, the snow receded into stubborn patches beneath the trees, and the porch swing creaked in the thawing breeze. I had met the condition of the will, 30 days in the house, but when I looked at its weathered siding and the kitchen where Ruth brewed tea each morning, I knew I wasn't leaving. Liam and I began tending to the house as if it were a promise instead of an obligation. He repaired the broken step on the porch. I painted the front door a warm shade of blue. We planted a small garden, turning the soil while Ruth supervised from her chair, knitting with a faint smile on her face. "Babies like to watch things grow," she said as she handed me a packet of tomato seeds. When our son was born, the world became both smaller and infinitely bigger. The labor was long, the hours blending into a blur of breath and strain, but when I heard his cry, every moment of hardship collapsed into something bright and weightless. Liam cut the cord with steady hands, his eyes wet. Ruth cradled him soon after, her thin arms firm with a strength that came from joy. She whispered something into his ear that she never repeated to anyone. In the weeks that followed, we kept our wedding small, a simple ceremony under the maple tree in the yard, Ruth in a pale blue dress that matched the knitted hat she'd made for her grandson. There was no crowd, no fanfare, just the three of us and the life we were choosing to build. I filed for divorce from Daniel soon after. The papers came back signed and final, and with them, a release I hadn't realized I was holding out for. I didn't think of him often anymore, except as a reminder of how easily we can lose ourselves in the wrong hands, and how important it is to reclaim what remains. The house no longer felt like an inheritance. It was ours in a way that had nothing to do with legal documents or conditions. Liam patched the drywall in the hallway, and I painted over most of the scuffs, leaving one small smudge low on the wall because it reminded me of a comet's tail. At night, with the baby asleep between us and the quiet of the countryside pressing in, I would think about how far I'd come from the woman who thought stability could be bought with a promise. I had learned that home wasn't about walls or roofs, it was about the people inside who made you feel safe enough to be yourself.